like, I always think the Nazis coming to power is like so many kind of 1% chances. If this happens, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, you've got massive debt, you've got occupied territory, France occupying quite a lot of German territory after World War One. We didn't really agree on how we even got here. The war was absolutely horrible, and now the French are really angry. The Brits are pretty angry, and they want money, like a lot of money. You might know the speech by Martin Niemöller. What he wrote was, first they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I did nothing. And then they came for the socialists, so I did nothing. And then they came for me.
Our guest today in the Guten podcast is JONNY WHITLAM, a British tour guide, podcaster, and entrepreneur based in Berlin. He's gained popularity on TikTok and Instagram, where he shares fascinating bits of Berlin history that no one else is telling you. We talk about the German Revolution of 1918, the conditions that led to the rise of the Nazis, and the events leading up to the end of the Cold War, and how the Berlin Wall fell by a tiny mistake on November 9th. It was an exciting conversation filled with fascinating stories, reminding us that many aspects of history tend to repeat themselves.
That's what I really wish I could say to the AfD today. Remember where it led you before.
Yeah.
The Nazis got what? A country divided, lost a huge part of it, some of it's even communist, would you believe? And like millions of dead Germans. That's what you achieved.
How are you doing, Johnny?
Hey, I'm really good, man, because you guys are really nice. So we've been sitting, chilling here for a few minutes and getting to know each other. So yeah, I'm having a good time. Okay.
We are currently recording from the Alte Münze.
Oh, yes.
And you recently did a video about the architecture of this building.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
So let's see what I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. The video, actually, it was one of those ones that did surprisingly quite well in terms of numbers, which is always a mystery to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's because a lot of other people maybe were like me, and like they walked past this and they were like, oh, it's some old building.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's older than me. But it was built during the Nazi dictatorship. So again, I forget the exact year, but it's only 12 years in which it could have been built, right? It's quite a smaller. Even then, they didn't build much at the end of the war. So there's only really about 10 years it could have been built in, yeah. And Alte Münze means, if you translate it literally, old Google Translate would have called it old coins. But new Google Translate would say the old mint. So mint being not the herb, but a place where you mint coins, where coins are made. Okay. And so the Nazis, or one of them, I guess, designed it to kind of blend in with the other older buildings in this area. Which, if you say that now and you walk around this area, you'd be like, what old buildings? There are not many. There are some fake old buildings on the other side of the road. They're from the 1980s, but we're actually in pretty much the oldest parts of Berlin. And so in this particular case, they wanted this building to blend in. They moved an older building where the entrance is, so where I would have come through to meet you guys this evening. I guess what stands out is that it doesn't stand out. So you have to really know what you're looking for to really see how it fits in with the Nazi style of architecture. There's the main entrance of the building, which is no longer used. So most people don't go through that. They don't see it. They don't notice it. But there used to be an eagle there with a swastika and so on. And that's been removed. Yeah. As per the law, which is fine. So yeah, but I think the Nazis just used it for exactly that purpose. They made coins here. So
And it's very interesting from the courtyard, a bit the architecture, how it looks like. It has the same style as the Olympia Stadium, right?
Absolutely. But only on this courtyard side.
Yeah.
So most people, again, wouldn't see it. And I noticed, although I have been here before many years ago, there's still bullet holes on the backside and netting because they guess don't have the money to fix it or the desire or both, right?
Yeah.
Normally when you see bullet holes in Berlin, it's like, they're fine. But this one, you've got the net, so they're like, they're actually worried. This is great. This is a great place. Yeah. Aside from, who built it.
Yeah. What are the parts of history that you enjoy the most, or that you feel like, I really are passionate about telling these things to the people who join my tours?
Yeah. I don't have I guess, favorite stories that I fall back on in that way, because it's a performance and a conversation. So it really depends on who you're talking to and how much they are excited, what gets them, right? And so the kind of classic that most tour guides probably don't enjoy, myself included, is how to phrase that delicately. Sometimes you'll be with lots of young people, and they have kind of been told they have to do this, and we were all teenagers. They don't care. Okay. And this is why I think being a teacher is an incredibly hard, important, and respectful job. Because making teenagers pay attention or care about anything is very hard. Very hard. Also, when I was 21, when I started, I think they thought I was cool. And now I'm just some old guy. And that sucks. So that's hard. And I am really appreciative of the schools that come here and give this wonderful opportunity to these kids. But I find it much harder to connect. Not that it's impossible, in case you're a teacher thinking of booking me. I think it's also, when we get to the videos that I do, anything that you do creatively, the last thing you do is always the best thing. Like, that's always the thing you care about the most. And so, what was the last one I released? On the colonnades, I think, some random...
these columns that are in Leipziger Straße or Potsdamer
Straße is correct. Yeah. And like, I don't know, it's cool that people found it interesting. It's probably a story I'm not going to tell so often because I'm never going to be on Potsdamer Straße with a group. If I'm thinking in terms of making your viewers interested to buy a tour, though, I just did a tour for the first time yesterday. As we're recording in the middle of March. So that was a tour on Berlin's Weimar history. So like the Weimar era is after World War I, before Hitler. And it was my first time ever doing a tour focused on that area. The tour was mostly put together by a friend of mine. Her name is Jules. So thank you, Jules. Always give the correct credit. What I liked about that one was a lot of these things, because it's pre-World War II, these things are no longer there. And so what you have to do is find the people and bring the pictures of them and be like, rather than being like, oh, wow, I'm seeing the Brandenburg Gate. Like, you don't get those moments, but you're like, have you ever heard of Muskel Adolf? Not that Adolf, by the way.
Just to make it clear.
Yeah. I mean, he was a pretty bad guy, but not that bad. He was like a organized crime boss in the 20s. Got in a big fight. Someone at this fight, according to at least one source that I read, it was outside of what is now Ostbahnhof station. Somebody hit someone with a frozen fish. And like, I just awesome. Like, that's an awesome level of detail. I cannot verify that it's true. It sounds like it's made up, but someone definitely hit someone with a fish.
Wow. That reminds me of a law in UK about not being in a public space with a fish, or suspicious with a fish, or something like that.
With a fish. We have lots of like silly laws that are like that we never got rid of. I remember like back in the 90s hearing this on local radio, that it's illegal to stand on the walls of my hometown, Nottingham, and like point a bow and arrow at a Welshman. Something like that. Like, I'm sure I've remembered it wrong, but you can always find a stupid law in the UK. You can always find somewhere in the UK that has like a childish name that will make you laugh. There's a village on the south coast somewhere called Shitterton.
Do you know any of those laws? Laws in Germany?
No. No. But Germany's had its current constitution is from 1949, from West Germany, which was kind of supposed to be a temporary thing, but then it worked out. Whereas the UK does not have a constitution. So we're in the minority of countries in the world where it's like everything is precedent and tradition. And I used to say it's weird, but it works.
But now,
does it work?
Good point. You were talking right now about the Weimar Republic, and then that's what came after. What was it? The German Revolution, or what was it like in 1918?
I guess Germans would call it the November Revolution.
November Revolution.
Yeah.
Do you live and work in Germany and you haven't done your tax declaration, the Steuererklärung? Well, stop being afraid because you might be missing a very good tax refund. I didn't know all the stuff that are deductible here in Germany. For example, if you live more than 30 minutes away from work, or if you bought a new laptop or new home office equipment, all of those stuff can be deducted and put on your tax declaration. Sometimes it's difficult to understand all of these laws and everything. You might be wondering, okay, this is too complicated. Well, it is only complicated if you're not using the right tools. And therefore, I want to thank our sponsor of this episode, WunderTax. WunderTax is an online platform where you can file your tax declaration. Very simple. You just need to follow the steps, upload your documents, and then it will calculate how much tax refund you might be granted. The average person in Germany gets around 1,095 euros back. That's a very good opportunity that you might be missing out. So if you want to see how much you might get on your tax refund, go to gutentag.wundertax.de. You can just run a simulation if you want to test it. And also that's the best way to support this podcast. So give it a try, wundertax.de. They have the website in plain English, so you will understand all the tax terminology without any trouble. So now let's continue with the conversation.
I guess Germans would call it the November Revolution.
November Revolution.
Yeah. So you've got a building near here called the Humboldt Forum, which is kind of
Humboldt Forum. Okay.
Yeah. No one calls it that. Right? The Berliner Schloss, the Berlin Palace.
Okay.
It's a kind of facsimile of that palace. It used to be where the East German Parliament was. It used to be where the Royal Family Palace was, and that's in some part where lots of revolutions took place. So you have a kind of revolution in 1848, the first kind of proper big movement for democracy in Berlin or Prussia, as it was back then, before Germany was founded. Kind of. And then 1918, it becomes a focal point again of the revolution that pushed the Kaiser out, right? This is when Germany becomes a republic. So obviously the palace is a kind of symbol of that.
Yeah.
And then the building was kind of home to an East German government building, definitely home to an East German government building. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you also saw protests in 1989 as well. Yeah.
Is when that revolution happens, it happened before that Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles? Or?
Yeah, so the Treaty of Versailles was not properly signed, pushed through everything until, I forget the exact date, but my brain is telling me June of 1919. Okay. But Germany was being kind of backed very much into a corner, October, November of 1918. Like they had been stretched very thin through World War I. Very, very thin. Germany had been cut off in the north where the coasts are, right? Mm-hmm. The Baltic Sea and the North Sea. And so supplies weren't getting in. Your regular person was like eating a lot less. Okay. A lot less variety of things. Like fats and oils were hard to come by. So it's like they can't make soap. They can't get leather, so they can't make shoes. Like imagine the three of us don't have shoes and we haven't showered.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be that happy.
Yeah.
Right? But you build that up over a good few years. And now, I mean, the three of us might well be dead as well, right? Yeah. We're all men that would have been sent to fight and get disease and get shot by a Russian or an American or a Frenchman or whatever. And so, if half your family are dead, you're also pretty unhappy, right? Mm-hmm. I would imagine.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the Kaiser or the emperor was not a very appealing figure. Mm-hmm. Like he wasn't well liked by other royalty across Europe, people who he's related to as well. It was like, cousin Bill is here, and I'm busy, and so he saw himself as this like great emperor, and he wanted to hold on to power. And the longer you hold on to power, I suppose, if you're losing, the worse you're making it. You have less and less and less to negotiate with, right?
Yeah.
And so, people keep getting killed in this war in France. The Western Front is the only one still going at this stage at the end of the war. And what's their goal? They've occupied a bit of France. What's their goal? What do they want? Like, this also isn't clear, right?
Yeah.
The French,
similar to a current situation also in the East.
Possibly. I mean, Putin's goal is pretty clear. He wants to take that.
Yeah.
Right? He wants those parts of Ukraine to be Russia. Ideally for him, I think the entire thing. Yeah. Whereas I don't think Kaiser Wilhelm II was trying to take over huge parts of France.
They just wanted Alsace region.
They want Alsace, but they also want to, if they win the war, then they can say, you're the bad guys, so you're going to pay us all this money.
Yeah, okay, the winner puts the terms and writes the history, right?
Yes. And they certainly needed the money. Germany had moved away from from backing all of its money by gold as soon as the war had started. So they're funding all of this war on promises.
Okay.
Yeah. And it gets bigger and bigger and more expensive, and they don't have enough men to replenish the front. They don't have enough money to buy the weapons. And so like this economic situation is just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so eventually, up in the north in Kiel, the German Navy, who have been sitting on their hands for a couple of years because everything's so successfully barricaded by the British, they're told, right, men, go onto the ships, let's go out and let's fight the British. And they all know it's a one-way ticket. And so they're like, I don't know, this war's been going on for more than 4 years and I love being alive. I'm not going to do it. So you have a mutiny. The mutineers get arrested. It's an injustice, obviously, for a lot of people. So this inspires more people to kind of join some form of resistance. This then spreads all throughout the country. The sailors become this kind of symbol of the revolution. They eventually come down to Berlin. The military, and Germany is essentially a military dictatorship during the First World War. The military, there's a certain point where the Kaiser calls a bunch of the officers together and he's like, these sailors are causing problems. They're getting to Berlin. Why don't we go and like turn our army around and just like go and fight and take Berlin back? So he invites 50 officers to talk and something like 35 show up and only one of them is like, yeah, good idea. And so he's lost it. If 34 out of 35 people, again, like you can check those numbers, but roughly that. If they're not on your side, then like you've lost. And it was eventually the German chancellor, so the kind of head politician, who in the latter days of the war had a bit more power. His name was Prince Max von Baden. He unilaterally decided there's not a Kaiser anymore. We're a republic. And then pretty much immediately hands power, or definitely immediately hands power over to the Social Democratic Party.
SPD.
SPD, yeah. Yeah, they were kind of split in two at this time because the left. The left likes nothing more than fighting each other. That's their favorite thing, man. Favorite thing.
Yeah.
But it is to say that this isn't like a revolution as a lot of people would picture it. It's very fractured. It takes place all over the country. You've got these two big kind of parties on the left who disagree actually about what this revolution should even be. And so everybody can accuse one another of doing the wrong thing. And this that's what sets the scene for this great new republic, this great new country, right? We didn't really agree on how we even got here. The war was absolutely horrible. And now the French are really angry. The Brits are pretty angry. And they want money, like a lot of money.
Yeah.
They want more money than the country's even got. Like
someone can also say we're not the French or who won the war, but it was the same German people through this revolution who made the war stop.
Yeah, you could argue that. But what a lot of people in the 1920s argued was exactly the opposite. Some people, far-right nationalist people, argued that those who agreed a ceasefire, an armistice with the French were traitors to the country because we should have won. And we were fighting this war. And why did we lose the war if we're still in France? And
it's important to know the whole context, for example, how is all the economic aspects, because you could think why it always looked like, it looked like they're stuck in Verdun and all of this area on the West Front, but why didn't suddenly surrender?
Yeah,
there was
absolutely.
Money involved, or who?
And so
was
that's how the Nazis, just to kind of finish off what I said, because otherwise it sounds like I was repeating Nazi propaganda. So I need to finish the last part, which is that's how they convinced a lot of men, mostly men who were maybe veterans, like who are now living in this very poor, cash-strapped country that probably was a shadow of its pre-war self, right? They convinced them that it was the left wing. It was the communists, it was the socialists who were traitors. And of course, the far right would also say that there are an extraordinary number of Jews inside of those parties, and that also feeds into their worldview of Jews as traitors. Jews fought as regular soldiers in the First World War, and Prussia had a pretty good record of winning wars in the 19th century, and so racists after World War I used this as just one of the many little things that would convince people, right, to hate Jews, or turn their kind of preconception of like we don't like these people into real hatred. Because they said, well, at the first war where we let Jews fight, we lost, right? And again, they lost for such a multitude of reasons, none of which was German Jews in uniforms and in the trenches.
But it was easier to blame somebody.
It's so much easier to understand, isn't it? It's so much easier to understand. It wasn't you. You're great. It was him.
Yeah.
Right? And you can see how people were. You can see how people were fooled.
Yeah.
I don't think you can forgive them for their actions thereafter in the 1930s and 40s, but you can see how they were fooled.
Yeah. And right now that you mentioned Prussia, I mean, what is Prussia? I mean, sometimes I'm confused. I mean, was it this Germany from the First World War? Was it Prussia, or what is it actually?
What is it? Yeah, you're gonna have to Google some maps, man. It's so much easier when you can see it. Prussia was essentially just a great big country in the middle of Europe, right? It stretched all the way up to what is now Kaliningrad, over in the northeast, and all the way to, God, on the west side,
Hanover, right?
Sorry?
All the way to Hanover and so on.
Further to what is the border, the western border of Germany now?
Okay.
At its peak. So Prussia had a larger land area, square kilometers, than Germany does right now. But Prussia was then, when Germany formed, Prussia was its largest state in terms of area and population. The eastern half is way less populated than the west, though. And it was then one of the states of Germany, thereafter, all the way until the end of the war. The Nazis wanted to, they loved this thing, they called it Gleichschaltung.
Okay.
Synchronicity or synchronizing stuff. Just like we should have one big government and everything should be all controlled centrally. So I think they maybe eventually would have done away with these kind of local borders, I guess, within Germany. But I mean, they had a lot of ideas, and what can you say?
Because Prussia had this big history of this empire, but was Prussia like a state, but also Germany was a different country. So I'm always wondering, why was not Prussia the whole country?
Yeah, this is quite confusing. So you've got all the different German states in the center of Europe, and I mean those borders change very frequently over the years. You can kind of take this back to around the year 800, when you've got the formation of the Holy Roman Empire of German nations. If you go down to the kind of southwest of the country, if you go down to the parts of the country where the Romans actually came through, this history is a lot more important. The Romans didn't make it all the way up here. We were while the Romans were making proper toilets and bringing fresh water to places, and making weapons and stuff, these guys were sorry, that was a bit mean. And so the Holy Roman Empire of German nations is not really a country per se. You still have different kings, emperors, allegiances, even wars on the inside of it. It's really confusing, to be honest. And it lasts for about 1,000 years until really around, Napoleon kind of smashes it, is my understanding. This is not my area of expertise. I only know the very basics here. And then you have, after this, the German Confederation. They end up with a parliament inside of Frankfurt. I think that's by 1840. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Please edit. So around the 1840s or so. But at this time in the 19th century, you start to have the Industrial Revolution. Prussia has been growing over the last 150 years or so. And it's starting to rival the big German power, which is Austria. And so then you have these arguments. You have people at this time in the 19th century who are like German nationalists, which is a term now that scares people.
Yeah.
But in the 19th century, it was like, we think Germany should be a country.
Okay.
Yeah. A German nationalist in the 1840s was like a Scottish nationalist now, right?
Yeah.
Like someone who's like, okay, that's your political view. Like that's quite legitimate. Yeah. And the two big arguments were what they called Kleindeutschland, Großdeutschland, right? So small and big. And the big one would have involved Austria, but Austria had their own empire, massive empire, several different ethnicities, languages, huge thing. They were a declining power, but no one wants to admit that. Okay. And so when eventually Germany was formed, they had kind of been invited to the party, but kind of locked out as well by Otto von Bismarck, who's gone down as one of history's kind of greatest diplomats and mustache owners. Both at the same time. I can't do either of those things. But yeah, that's, this is a kind of story that could fill several different books. But Bismarck was the Prussian chancellor, and it was him much more than the Prussian king that wanted this formation of Germany. But the Prussian king would become the German emperor.
Okay.
And so he marches home surrounded by these other kings. He goes down as a great hero with a really stupid beard. Look up Kaiser Wilhelm I's beard.
And a lot of the traits that we have nowadays from the Germans are a lot of them Prussian traits, right? Like this kind of discipline and punctuality and order. A lot of those are known as Prussian.
Those are things that would have been associated very much with Prussia. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very militarized society. And therefore, if you're a militarized society, then you show up on time. You do what you're told. You cut your hair, Sorry.
But then suddenly disappears this identity as Prussian, even though it was all over Poland as well, and in Germany, many parts of Germany. Then after the First World War, it just suddenly disappears, this whole identity.
Second World War, I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Still in the Weimar Republic, you still had it.
Less so, but then Germany becomes incredibly militarized again.
Okay.
So I think you can apply some of those Prussian stereotypes to the Second World War as well.
Because I find it interesting that there was the empire, and there was probably, I don't know, traditions or culture or whatever, and then suddenly after nowadays, nobody would say, "Oh, I'm Prussian," or "I have Prussian origins," or it's just like it disappeared.
Yep,
somehow.
Absolutely. So, God, I wouldn't want to put a percentage on it, but let's just say, for argument's sake, roughly half of what was Prussia is like gone after World War II, right? It's gone into the sense that it's not Germany anymore.
Yeah.
So it's really gone after World War II. A lot of it becomes the western half of Poland. The Germans are like literally kicked out. Like it takes a few years, but like you have to go, right?
Yeah.
So these are formerly German cities that are now Polish cities. And those borders have kind of chopped and changed over the years as well. You can imagine a lot of Germans didn't really accept that the borders had changed immediately after World War II either, right?
I can imagine.
The country that did accept the borders was East Germany, because they were also very much controlled by the person who had defined those borders, which was Stalin. Stalin wanted those borders to change. That's how he wanted them to change. The Allies couldn't do anything about that, even if they wanted to. So that was that. So the kind of idea that these are lost territories that we should actually still have was much more common in the 1950s in West Germany. This is a very outdated viewpoint now. You wouldn't really meet anybody with this viewpoint now unless they're of a particular political persuasion. So if you're the person watching this and getting angry,
for example, the Reichsbürgers or something like that.
Yeah, it's like that level where like it's kind of a weird fantasy level. And so I think why you wouldn't associate as being Prussian is like Germany was smashed, right? It was cut up, it was divided. Like they lost this bit, this part became communist East Germany, this part became capitalist West Germany. And I think what probably happened is people started to associate more with those identities, right? Like both of them probably would have said, I'm from the good Germany, right?
Yeah.
Which is now this new one, whichever one that is. And of course they both have their merits and problems and whatever. And that's a whole massive topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was the German identity of like 1954, West Germany win the World Cup, right?
Yeah.
What is that country? It's like half of the country that was there before.
Yeah.
And like, are the East Germans us or not us? Like, how would you feel, right? I mean, hey, have Mexico ever won the World Cup?
No, never.
No. And England have, but like way before I was born, man. Like, but it would be an amazing feeling,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
But then imagine.
But then, so
but you're East German, and you don't know if you should feel happy about it or not, or are you part of them or not?
Oh, you know that you shouldn't.
Okay, well,
East Germany.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But no, broadly, what you're saying is correct. Yeah, I agree with that.
Do you feel identified by that, or is just
I just think there was a bigger question, and then that was the 1950s. And then those people have kids. Those people have kids.
Yeah.
So anyone who's like, imagine someone who's our age being like, "I'm Prussian," and like not saying it as a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Then like their parents must have said it, and their parents must have said it to them. It would just be like, I think with those couple of generations gone, that Prussia, even my guess is in most German people's heads, Prussia is like, oh yeah, the guys with the hats.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it feels like a distant, almost comedic thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just my interpretation.
It's like asking an Italian, are you a Roman, for example?
Well, ask a Roman if they're a Roman. They will tell you. Yeah. I think, but you can make so many comparisons between Italy and Germany because the histories are in some ways quite similar, right? Italy unified just before Germany did, and Italy has such strong regional identities that if you ask an Italian if they're Italian, I think they'll say yes. But if an Italian asks you if you're Italian, they'll be like, I'm from the south, or I'm from Sicily, or I'm from Milan. Or
actually, for me, it's hard to understand this cut of the like we are not this anymore, because, for instance, in Mexico, you still can say people that they are descendants from Aztecs or from like very old indigenous, families. Yeah, and so it's something that I can see like on my daily life. And for instance, also with this separation of the country, Mexico was also lost part of the territory with this United States, and until now, people is like still like, how can we get it back? Yeah, I think for me, then the difference would be Germany lost this territory and was smashed into pieces because of Germans. And Mexico, I only know the very broad strokes of the history, right? I've never studied the history of Mexico, but, so correct me if I'm wrong, but like Spanish came over, didn't kill everybody. Well, maybe they wanted to. Spanish are kicked out. There's a war then, I assume a war where you lost territory with the United States and so on. Yeah. But Mexico has a kind of inbuilt diversity and a kind of underdog success story of like, okay, we pushed out the Spanish, we fought with the Americans, and therefore people are a bit more proud of where they're from. Whereas in Germany, it was exactly the worst of this country. It was the worst of German pride. That even to this day makes some people feel weird to say, I'm proud to be German. Because at least other Europeans in our head, we go like, because are you though? Which is so weird as well. Like, I mean, it's not weird because like terrible things happen, but it's weird when you're like, well, I'm British.
And you can say,
I don't know if we did anything bad in history.
Well, maybe if you ask some countries,
but they all speak English. Is that because they like us so much?
Yeah, of course, like they think that it's a beautiful language.
But it's interesting. Yeah.
English, French, Spanish. I mean, you guys must have met a whole ton of Spanish people who are just like, Spain's great. We civilized you, right? Like they wouldn't say that probably, but
they still say that.
Oh, they say it.
They say it. I mean, the more like right-wingy people have this narrative.
You always get those people, but not your average Spanish person.
No, of course not.
I would say
disagreement.
I mean. Because in Spain you have still the king, and there's still like, let's say the half of the people, they're still like very supporting the royalty family, and all of these people still believe inside of them that they went to civilize and bring religion to people. So
I think a lot of British people would feel the same. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that kind of rise of British nationalism in the last years. That is, not the way where it's like, look at our funny teeth, look at Hugh Grant, ha ha ha, Robin Hood, aren't we great? But it's more like this feeling of superiority. I think it's a shame that a sense of pride has been destroyed in a way for Germany, but at the same time, that sense of pride that other countries and places have is also,
even though they have done also
it's kind of misguided as well, right?
Yeah, true.
It's a very difficult.
It always depends maybe who did you damage. For example, Germany was like
also
damaging their European neighbors.
Exactly.
Also, if you won, like for instance, UK won, like
for the most part, right? I mean, and then when the empire starts to kind of collapse, and you have independence movements across the world, it's.
But you sell it as we are giving them the chance to be free.
Sometimes
you sell it as a heroic thing.
Right? Yeah, it depends. And again, like I wish I knew more about this. I'm kind of reaching the edges of my knowledge about this, especially because it's to so many different countries. And I cannot. But it really is, and I cannot.
There's so many that it's hard to keep track.
I think it is. Yes. And I don't. Yes. And actually, because of my job and my interests, I know the history of Germany, my adopted home, much better than I know the history of the UK.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll just assume that my country oppressed yours at some time, and then like maybe I'll be happy that I'm wrong.
Then, okay, all of these conditions that during the First World War that on the terms and all of this big debt that Germany had with France and with England created the situation that then made that the Nazis came into power, right?
Yeah, one of, like, I always think the Nazis coming to power is like so many kind of 1% chances. If this happens, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens. So in a way, it's incredibly bad luck without removing guilt from the horrible people that made that happen.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you've got massive debt. You've got occupied territory. France occupying quite a lot of German territory after World War One. The Ruhrgebiet, where coal is mined and money is made, and another.
They just took that area, right?
They occupied it and made sure that all the money and resources and whatever that came out of it went to France. Right? Yeah. Broadly speaking, and then the other coal mining area of Germany in the east was the Allies agreed that was now part of Poland, and so without natural resources, Germany couldn't produce things, sell them, make money, and therefore pay their debts. So it's a kind of like a spinning wheel of shit that happens afterwards.
When the Nazis came to power, or how did they became an industrial country or power to build weapons?
They just stopped paying people.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not going to pay the debts. Yeah. I don't know exactly when and how they stopped that, but they also a video I made recently was about Julius Fromm, who invented the rubber seamless condom, right? Like the condom that I assume we've all used. If you, I don't know. I know you're not very lucky. But I mean, this is a license to print money, right? The patent for the rubber seamless condom ends up in the hands of Hermann Goering because the guy that invented it's a Jew. So that's it. So, they chase him out the country. He gets out with a bit of money. He manages to get out the country, but doesn't take his business and his life with him. Right. And so that's just one example of how they were able to really personally enrich themselves, but also then take that kind of massive apparatus into presumably state hands. The other thing with the Nazis is, this may shock you, you can't always trust them. So whatever they printed, whatever actually happened, they might be different things, right? People say, the Nazis kept lots of records. They did. I also don't trust the Nazis. So broadly speaking, you can trust some of these records, but you always have to think, like, who wrote that, when, and why, right?
It's like when you check like some documents from the Romans, from the historians, and they talk about the greatness of the Caesar and everything. Is like, how much can you believe it? It's like, it's very biased because it's...
Especially then, because who was privileged enough to be able to write and have the materials and have it preserved and so on.
Yeah.
So but they... I think maybe what you're hinting at is that the Nazis, for a lot of people in the country in the first few years, probably did improve the quality of their lives, right? Which is one of those, sounds like a weird thing to say, but then of course they did. Otherwise they wouldn't have been around for very long, right? So sure, they immediately kicked off by doing some horrible things to the people they didn't like, but that's a minority. And then it's a bigger minority, and then a bigger minority, a bigger minority, and so on. You might know the speech by a man who's actually a little problematic in some ways, Martin Niemöller. You might know it, even though you think you don't.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was a priest who voted for the Nazis. You can imagine, Germany's like having a social revolution. There are 3 gay districts in Berlin. People are drinking all the time. There's lots of crime. You can imagine that would shift some conservative people towards a party that have a clear line on Germany is kind of suffering this moral collapse. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Niemöller spoke with Hitler in 1932. And basically said that, made an agreement where Hitler wouldn't meddle with the church. Church would still have a right to say and do whatever they wanted. Because Hitler didn't walk around going, I'm going to be in control of absolutely everything. And if you even so much think anything that I don't like, you will be dead. Right? Otherwise, no one would have voted for him. Yeah. Right? Well, someone probably still would. And anyway, Niemöller had a big disagreement with the Nazis, on something that I think is quite racist, or I'm certain is quite racist. For the Nazis, eventually they decided, A, what a Jew was. That took them a while. And then they decided that all Jews are just Jews. They wouldn't have used the term genetically because that wouldn't have properly existed at that time, but that's kind of what they thought, like from birth, as if it's a different kind of plant from you and I. If we're this kind of tree, then they're that kind of tree. They're just completely different, right? Niemöller, as a religious man, as a Christian man, decided that Jew was someone who had a different religion to him, and therefore, if they converted to Christianity, in his kind of terminology, they could be rescued and saved. Which I think, if we were Christians and we went to a Jew and we said, "You can be rescued," they might say, "I'm very tired right now." Like it's not a nice thing to say, but it's not. They should all be killed. They're all subhuman. It's a different level, let's say.
At least what the Spanish Empire was doing, they were sending missionaries to save all of these people. Yes. And if they were converted, then they will be, let's say, allowed to become, or not to be killed at least.
Yeah. I think it's a similar kind of mindset to that, which again, it's deeply problematic.
Yeah.
But Niemöller definitely... Let's say we take the best of what he's saying. He wants to rescue these people from a horrible fate under the Nazis. I think he was an anti-Semite, at least at that time. I should also say that he lived until the middle of the 1980s, and he was quite vocal opponent of the Nazis what he did. And again, I haven't got to the part where everyone will have heard of him either, which is when he was in prison. He was put in prison in 2 concentration camps, Sachsenhausen and Dachau. For his disagreement with the Nazis. And what he wrote was, first they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I did nothing. And then they came for the socialists, I was not a socialist, so I did nothing. And then they came for the trade unionists, I was not a trade unionist, so I did nothing. And then they came for me, and no one was left to stand up for me. And so what he does is he accurately describes what happened in 1933, right? It was first the communists and the socialists, the trade unionists, and then it was the Centre Party, and then it was the German People's Party, and then it was... the Nazis hated the idea of the trade unions. That's too much power for someone else. So they made their own version of that, the German Labour Front, and so on. And so, I often will do this if I have a group of people. I'll be like, when I'm telling this kind of same story, I'll say like, "Oh, we're not going to attack all of you. It's like just him. We just don't like him. And we're going to get rid of him.
Yeah,
he's gone. And now we're going to go for you.
Yeah,
you're gone." And now you got to imagine you do this with 1, 2, 3 out of 20 people. And I think maybe we can start to understand exactly that's what the Nazis did on a huge scale, right? They didn't go, everyone all the time.
Yeah. Which is a little bit what happens, for example, nowadays. For example, they say the far right or the AfD wants to get rid of immigrants. But some people will say, no, but just the ones who are illegal. All right, okay, they go for it. And then just the ones who are not working. All right. Then just the ones who, and then... until it gets to you, the one that, but I thought I had a working visa, I wouldn't have any problem. But you too, bye-bye, or stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been told before. Not immigrants like you.
Yeah. Also.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, but that's a responsibility that we have when we talk to these people to be like, no, you do mean immigrants like me. Of course you do.
Yeah.
You know, on paper, I'm the same as any other immigrant, right? Like, so yeah, I imagine you don't bump into hardcore AfD voters so often because we live in the center of Berlin. There's not that many here, and still something like 9 or 10% of Berlin voted AfD recently, or something like that. I double check the figures. Yeah. It's not no one like we would always say and think, but yeah, there is a definite responsibility we have. I've lived like here long enough, and I'm lucky enough to have become a German citizen as well, so I can vote here. So yeah, I have.
Okay, so on paper, you're better off than us.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe the Nazis stripped people of citizenship. That's what they did to Jews, black people.
Yeah, well, true. Exactly. Because, for example, AfD says, okay, also, we want to take the passports for people who have double nationalities or who are, pass Deutsch. Just
absolutely. So it's like,
you're not coming for me. Wait a little bit, and maybe they will come for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I tend to be an optimist. The AfD are a problematic organization that I wish we didn't have to deal with.
Yeah.
Hello, comments. Oh no, all right. I'm not going to engage with you. Oh dear.
Okay, by going back to the priest.
Yeah. And this is where he lives. Going back to what, sorry?
To the priest.
But that was it. That was the kind of end of the story. That's his speech. That's what a lot of people, that speech a lot of people will know. And then there's some dispute as to whether or not he included Jews in that speech. And I think in the first versions he didn't, but later he did. So I don't want to paint him as this like
martyr or something.
But I don't want to paint him as a giant anti-Semite either. I think I need to do more research to really find out how I think and how I feel about him, because people often only know that speech, and it's so quickly. I mean, imagine a preacher saying it, not just some guy. Like, it has a rhythm, it's convincing, it educates you about what happened. It's a good speech, right? But I think as a figure himself, I think he was a bit anti-Semitic.
Because he saw being a Jew as a bad thing that you need to be converted from, right?
But but also I think a lot of people are a little bit racist, right? And it's how you act on that, and if you're willing to learn about that and so on. So like, I only know this tiny part, and like there are things where I would say, no, I know this, and I'm sure. And for him, I want to find out more. I want to find out, did he come and talk about this? Because, the guy's name is plastered all over the place in West Berlin, where he was a priest. And there's an institute there or something. So he can't, my optimistic feeling is he can't be that bad if Germans are willing to say, like, here's this guy's name, and here's Ninja, and he's a good guy, because not a lot of bad guys make it through into, like, today, prominent, like, revered positions. Like, after World War II, sure, definitely. But in 2024, Niemöller is Niemöller is someone I should do a podcast episode on. I have a podcast. Actually, as we're recording, the podcast will come out tomorrow. But as people are watching this, that means
there are a couple of episodes already online, right?
Should be. I hope so. If all the things have gone right, like they tell me they have, it's all uploaded and ready to go. Right. And actually, the first episode is on the November Revolution. So it's a lot of the stuff that we talked about here, but it will be in more detail, and it will be with a wonderful and very funny friend of mine, Pip, who is a fellow guide. She's the other half of the podcast, and she's bringing her stories. I'm bringing my stories. And the one thing in life, and I want you to answer this as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
The one thing in life I've ever like been into before it was cool was podcasts. Like, I got podcast addicted in like 2008 or 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. Like,
after the iPhone came,
I didn't even have an iPhone, man. Like, I had at that iPod. I was like plugging my iPod into my computer. I was like, oh, podcast, free, great, brilliant, amazing. It's the only thing I've ever liked before it was cool. Do you have a thing that you liked before it was cool?
I was a hipster before it was cool.
Wait, I mean, you guys are both Mexican. I mean, like, you can go like, we were always eating avocados anyway, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. I was eating avocados before they were.
Oh, you guys think they're cool now? Okay. I don't know. My mom buys those for me.
Yep. No, but actually, I think before it got more popular, I also got into podcasts. You know, if you're into history, you probably heard from him, Dan Carlin, with Hardcore History. So that was my first touch with a podcast. I heard that and said, that is great. How do you call this thing? Like a radio show? It's called podcast. Podcast. Okay. Yeah.
It's his is intense, man. It's good. But yeah. Mine are not 5 hours long.
Yeah.
They're not even 1 hour long. But yeah, no, I always remember listening to his World War One.
Yeah, blueprint for Armageddon. Like that's where the one that it really hooked me. Like, what was it? Like, I think like 4 episodes of 5 hours each.
Yeah.
And then you were like really into it. Like,
wow. Yeah. It's good stuff. I know like proper historians watching this are like, oh no, he's one of the things people reference when they don't really know history. And I'm like, okay, but I'm not a proper historian. I never studied history. I didn't even like history in school. So, I've kind of come to it a bit later in a bit of a different way. But
yeah,
he also says, I'm not a historian.
Yeah.
Like,
or historians will disagree with me, or historians will say this about how I tell it. But this is a very
exactly. I think he gives it enough kind of context in that way that you can be like, okay, broadly what he's saying is true if some specifics are rather different. But I don't know if there's any like big controversy surrounding him or anything. But he seems like a really like decent dude and does his job well.
Yeah. I listened to one from Prophets of Doom, I think it was called, about Anabaptists.
Oh wow!
In Münster, how they after Luther and the whole Reformation revolution, or I don't know if it was called revolution, after the Reformation comes, a lot of groups start believing and creating their own set of beliefs, and then there's the Anabaptists, who are like a thing in the area between like in Münster, very near the Netherlands and so on. They become very radicalized there, and they start creating this whole set of rules, and it's super interesting how he tells a story, and then how all the radicals Anabaptists gets busted by, I don't know, the prince or the king, or I don't know who came and put the leaders in a cage, which is still there in the top of the square somewhere in Münster.
That's grim.
I want you also to know a little bit more about Germania.
Oh,
what is Germania? What was Germania? Where did it exist? Where did it come from?
Oh God, well, it didn't really exist ever. Oh gosh, it must have been the Romans that coined the term. Yeah, the Nazis were trying to build a big new capital, so they wanted to call that Germania. The Nazis didn't really like Berlin. Berlin was filled with communists, big communist city. The Nazis got their support in the countryside, right? Not in the city.
That doesn't change so much from nowadays.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a big working class city. It's also like dirty, and it's where, as I said before, you've got 3 different gay districts, and the Institute for Sexual Research, headed by Magnus Hirschfeld. That's like one of the first things to be attacked by the Nazis in 6th of May 1933. It's only a few weeks after Hitler comes to power. Yeah. So all these things that they don't like. And so they plan to kind of rebuild it. So you mentioned before the Olympic Stadium, right? They want to build things in that style, right? Which is a new style. It's also quite modern, right? In how it looks. But they're also trying to be inspired by the Romans and by the Greeks, and try to show that, the Germans have always been brilliant throughout history when they kind of haven't. Like they've never, were they the big power that went across the world that had the most futuristic technology, right? No, they weren't, right? They were always there. They're always part of it because they're in the center of Europe. But the Nazis, I guess, were trying to show we're big, we're powerful, we're important. And so that's what the Olympic Stadium does. To this day, it's an impressive place. If you go there, I was last there the other day at a football game. Hertha won 5-2. And my dad was here. I was like, Dad loves football. Let's go see a football game. By the way, the home side will lose. Like, that's what they do. 5-2. Amazing. Germania then was a plan to kind of just like build an entire new city, and like, you know, they got as far as building a model. They demolished quite a few parts of town. There are still some buildings you can see. If you ever go, say, through the Brandenburg Gate, there's a great big road, right? This road was going to be used for parades and so on, right? Today it's called the Straße des 17. Juni. It used to be called the Siegesallee, the Victory Alley, right? Mm-hmm. You go right to the other end, you've got the Charlottenburg Gate that was widened to make way for this great big...
Where the university campuses are?
I believe that's correct, yes. Yeah. Yes, I never went to university here, but I think, as you go through, they're on the left side. I think. Yeah. And you get to like Ernst Reuterplatz and stuff like that. Yeah, this is all this big kind of road. You can tell by the street lights there as well. I think the first video I ever did, so that came out last year, I think that was about the streetlights, either the first or the second one. Speer's lantern. So Albert Speer was the boss behind the project. Let's say he's not the only architect behind it, as people often think. I mean, this was a total redesigning for a city. So you know, obviously he didn't design all the buildings himself, but he had final say over everything. But you can still see parts of it, like the Italian embassy, Japanese embassy, Spanish embassy. Like, that's not a coincidence, right?
That's here near Tiergarten, all of this building district.
And if you look at them, you'll see they're all kind of similar, kind of different, because they're embassies, so they're allowed to show off a bit more kind of flair and style. But they were all countries that Nazi Germany was very much friends with. So you can see the same with East German history, like the Czech embassy from the 1970s. It's like a communist spaceship landed here, you know. They were friends with East Germany. We've got a giant North Korean embassy here, right? Because it was a communist country. It was an Eastern Allied country, right? So the East Germans let them have all this space, right? So it's not to entirely liken East Germany with the Nazis, but still. But yeah, Germania was more like a kind of fever dream. Like, let's build this big thing. The amazing guys over at the amazing people over at Berliner Unterwelten, they've got a model of the Germania project, and that's in Gesundbrunnen station. It's one of those German things where you're not allowed to take pictures of it. And they're like, yeah, Germans are like that, aren't they? And they're like, but if I took photos of this and showed it to my friends and I was like, this thing is cool, then they might come here.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but
they don't want people.
Gesundbrunnen, there is a model of how.
And so that gives you this kind of idea of just how big all of this would be. The centerpiece was a giant dome. So the Reichstag building is Germany's parliament, massive thing, right? Built in the 1890s, and for the Nazis that would just be one building on a giant square. And at one end of this giant square would be a huge dome, right? So 300 meters tall. The disco ball on the TV tower is like 320 meters or so.
So they wanted to have it bigger, taller.
Massive. Wow. Not a little shorter than the TV tower, but massive thing. And like, 200,000 people inside there that would, I guess, come a bit like going to the Vatican. I think was in their heads, right? Of like, and they'll come here and Hitler will tell everyone how he hates all these people and how he's brilliant, and everyone will go, play the hits, buddy. But yeah, they demolished some buildings, they built some lampposts, they built some staircases that lead to the Victory Column under the road. Those are also toilets, So if I'm ever on the bus with the tour group, I'll be like, so the Nazis wanted to build this, and this. Anyway, they built some stairs and some toilets. So, but it just shows you they are kind of ridiculous. If they weren't so evil, they're like ridiculous figures, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be the biggest, best, greatest this. And what do they achieve? Toilets. That's what I really wish I could say to the AfD today, right? Like, all these thoughts, feelings, directions, whatever. Remember where it led you before.
Yeah.
The Nazis got what? A country divided, lost a huge part of it. Some of it's even communist, would you believe? And like millions of dead Germans. That's what you achieved.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of what you wanted.
Yeah. Well, it's very obvious and very known. Germany gets divided many years with this wall. And then somewhere in November 9th, the wall falls by mistake.
Kind of by mistake. Yeah, a little bit by mistake.
Do you know a little bit a
little bit. No, like there was a plan to announce that East Germans could travel to the west, like probably on November 10th, but it kind of gets a bit mangled and it comes out a bit early. And I think there's kind of a lot of excitement.
Do you have that story on your tour?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, what I like to do is I like to do it on my Cold War tour, and I like to go to the place where the wall was first opened, which is up at Bornholmer Strasse. And so if you're watching this and you live here, you can go up there and ideally you can read German, because there's a small exhibition, which is fine, but actually you should look in the ground and you'll see this metal on the ground, and it will tell you, you have to follow it backwards, go downhill, then follow it properly walking uphill, and it will tell you what happened on November 9th, like at midday, at 4 o'clock, at 4:45, at 8, and it's an exciting story. It's also, most of the stories I tell are like, and then he died, and then they died, and then they killed 1,000 people, and like, I don't tell them for that effect, but there's a reason that when you see the signs talking about November 9th, 89 throughout the city, it's called the Friedliche Revolution, the peaceful revolution. And like, Jesus Christ, do these guys need some like peaceful revolution in their history? You know what I mean? like to have a good moment like that, whatever the consequences of it were, to have a good moment is quite an amazing thing. And I was only joking about like, you gotta,
book the tour.
Of course, yeah, of course, no. I do as my kind of as quick a version as possible. But I mean, you start to have cracks all across Eastern Europe because the system isn't working. It's also not built for everybody. This is one of the benefits of democracy, right? For all of its flaws, for all of its compromises, at least everyone has a part in it. Or if you really hate the government, at least you've got the next election, right? But if you've got a system where there's no end to it, then it's going to build frustration that has to be let out in a different way.
Yeah.
East Germany also runs out of money in the 80s, like, because they're cut off from Russian oil. Would you believe? Yeah.
History repeat itself.
Yeah. There's no new stories in here. It's a good thing about history. You don't need news stories. And so basically, you get this consumerist West where it looks like life gets better. And I'm not going to say that the West is all perfect and everything, but like, let's say this is 20 years ago and I'm the dude with the newest iPod and you got the old one, like there's a little bit of that, right? Like it's a little bit of, they've got it a bit better than me, right? That creates a longing for what the other side could be. And that's something that East and West Germany have that no other communist East European country has in the same way, right? They could be us. We are them. We're actually the same, right? Like that's why you always have this comparison, let's say, between the two. And so you've got cracks in the system. You've got another place you could be. It's why people are willing to risk their lives to get over there as well, right? Very tragically, they also lose their lives doing it, right? At least 140 people, I think. And so protests start to grow. 1989. At the same time, Hungary cuts down their barbed wire at the border on TV, right? That's the border between Hungary and Austria. So, hey, they're saying, we're not going to stop you. And so for East Germans, they drive through what was then Czechoslovakia, they drive into Hungary, they can go to Austria, which means they can go to Bavaria, which means they're in West Germany. And so Hungary's opening the border. East Germany says no travel. No travel for anyone anymore. And so it goes from like, you're only allowed to travel to say, what they call friendly countries, right? Unless you've got a special pass, permit, whatever, to you just can't travel anymore. And so you've got this kind of upsurge of like, maybe things are going to get better across Eastern Europe that's then met by not for you. Well, what happens when I tell you can't have this cup?
You want it more.
Pretty good cup. Maybe you do. I don't know. You're not going to find out. And so of course you want it more. And so by forbidding travel, of course more East Germans want to travel. And so of course some people end up being brave enough to protest. And at the same time, who are the people that are supposed to shut down this protest? The fellow East Germans. So, we're going to cut several long stories short, but in October of 89, there's one point where, everyone's told this, if there's a protest on this night, well, do what you want, but if you're staying on the streets after 10 p.m., you should know that we've sent extra blood to all the hospitals, and the army are going to be on the streets. And it is, they've sent blood to the hospitals, like they're preparing for a bloodbath. And the army disobey orders and don't open fire. Try being a dictator without an army, you know?
Yeah.
And so you've got fundamental flaws that are appearing in this country, and the protests grow and grow and grow. And then, like you said, like before, the guy makes a big mistake. Gunter Schabowski makes a big mistake. Died about 10 years ago, I think, Schabowski. And so there's been a big change in the East German government anyway. So Erich Honecker, it's another problem East Germany had. Honecker's been leader since 1970. Like, dude's old. He's old and out of touch. He's been in power for like over 18 years.
Yeah.
19 years at this time. Like, journalists want a story, right? They're going to ask those probing questions. They're going to ask the tough questions. They're going to embarrass you, whatever. And so, yeah, I watched this very recently online. We're going to let people travel. And then he says, this words that all Germans watching this know. You know, when is it effective? And he says, ab sofort unverzüglich.
Yeah.
You know, like he's a little confused, but it's not like, guys, we've decided to get rid of the Berlin Wall. Bye. Right.
Yeah.
And so then you have this big pouring out of people onto the streets who have watched this. Like, unverzüglich is like, no Germans really, like, it's not a common phrase. It's like now, like this is already happened.
Yeah.
And so people are out on the streets, and they're expecting to get through the border, and eventually enough people show up at the Bornholmer Strasse crossing where, as far as I know, from an interview I read with the guy, I think on the 25th anniversary of it happening, the guy who was in charge of the checkpoint, eventually they just let people through because they were going to get crushed. And again, there's a bit more to the story than this. I mean, there's books, documentaries about this thing. But yeah, I also find it, I remember reading this interview because I was like, this dude is so modest. Like, I'd be like, and then I saw that people were going to get hurt. And I thought, this Cold War has got to end. You know, but this guy is like, you don't want people to get hurt, you know. So like, I opened the gate.
Yeah.
You know, and
You're the hero now, bravo.
I wish I could be that cool, you know. And like that's it. Once one gate is open, they all open. And you know, you can find these photos from the 10th of November, like everyone's standing on top of the Berlin Wall, East and West coming out to hang out together, blah blah blah. But the funny story is, right, that on Monday the East Germans go back to work. Right? Like this happens on a Thursday, I think. And like on Monday, they go back to work. Like people are excited, but they're not like, no, it's not like everyone is like, oh, we've been so oppressed this whole time. Finally, off we go. Like, of course, people go back to work because they got to earn enough money to go to the supermarket the next day and feed their family and live their normal life and whatever, you know? And I think that's also, it's kind of funny in a way, but it's also quite human in a way, right? You're not like, I'm sure some people do like, I'm going to camp in the Tiergarten. Like, I'm never leaving West Berlin now I've got over. But for most people, it was like, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, back to my life, you know? That's it, man. Like, that went from communist dictatorship to kind of like, we've got this like slapped together democracy, and now we're part of, you know, those guys that for 40 years we told you were the enemy? They're us now. We're us. We're friends.
Yeah.
And everybody lived happily ever after.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned that people that know about history in Germany, they are already in the second page. But what are these significant events that are not very aware of?
Yeah, I think one of the ones we kind of touched on a little bit before was the first revolution I mentioned, 1848. And like, because that speaks a lot to how interconnected democratic and workers' movements across Europe were. Sorry, I said were. A mix of were and are, but how interconnected these movements were. And I've got the benefit of a kind of broader perspective on that, mostly thanks to Paul. What's Paul's last name? Why can't I remember that? Paul, who works at the cemetery for the March revolutionaries, who gave me a tour of the place recently, and we shot a video together, and so I did a bit of reading in anticipation for that as well. And so this is a moment where, you know, you've like Marx comes back to Germany because like or he goes over to Paris, I think. But he certainly leaves the UK because the revolution is starting, right? It's the kind of stuff that inspires these people who would really later inspire the workers' movements of Europe, which is not just Lenin and, the Soviet Revolution and all the communist countries or socialist countries that would follow, but it is regular people actually having political influence and representation, and this is one of the big starting points of that, right? And I mean people like us being able to vote. We owe, if you can vote here, I'm sorry, but we owe something to this movement as well, because it used to be like landowning men over the age of 25, right? Which is almost nobody. And so, yeah, it's certainly it's certainly worth visiting this cemetery.
Yeah.
There's hardly any graves there because it's 200 years old. But the way that the story is told, the way the information is presented, there's several times today where we've been like, oh, that sounds familiar. And it's like a story from 180.
Yeah.
Yeah, 180. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Almost 200 years ago. That is also still relevant. And I think not just the longer I'm a guide, but the more that I'm doing these short Instagram, TikTok videos that have been really popular with people who live here. I thought they were just for tourists, but people who live here like them. Yeah. And that's kind of inspired me to go, okay, what are the things people know about this story? What is being on page 1? It's like, there was Hitler, there was a wall, right? That's what people know. They know there's two things.
And Hitler didn't build a wall.
Hitler didn't build the wall, man. No, not that wall. And it's like any city. There's so much more to it, but it can be a bit harder, I think, to find. I think whenever I talk about Frederick the Great, who's a king in the 18th century, people are like, it's a king in the 18th century. Okay. And then you find out more about him and you're like, oh, this dude's interesting.
Yeah.
But you have to push people. Those are the people on page 1.
Yeah.
And you have to push a bit more. Yeah.
If you could recommend 3 places to visit here in Berlin, which were?
Oh, 3 places that I
not
really...
mainstream.
Not mainstream. I figured. Number 1, Friedrichsfelde Cemetery. Zentralfriedhof Friedrichsfelde, I think. So that's where you've got the memorial to the socialists. So that's where Karl Liebknecht is buried. He's the founder of the German Communist Party. It's also where his dad is buried, who's one of the founders of the Social Democratic Party. You've also got Walter Ulbricht buried there, who is the East German leader who set up the Berlin Wall. Why this guy has a regular grave still, I don't know. I think that's Germany deals with its history quite well, but there are parts where it doesn't too. And it's where the East German regime would bury a lot of the people that were important to them. Even actually after East Germany collapsed, people were buried there that were important to the East German regime, including the head of the Stasi, Erich Mielke, who was buried there in, I think, the year 2000 in an unmarked grave. Google this grave and tell me it's unmarked. It doesn't say Erich Mielke on it, but it's not hidden. Where else? So, hey, that's also in Lichtenberg is the Dong Xuan Center. So have you heard of the Dong Xuan Center?
No.
Neither of you. Oh, man.
The Dong Center.
Like, this is like you walk into it and it's like you walk into Vietnam. Like,
okay, no.
Like it's all these big halls. So I was lucky enough to join a tour of that. And that tour was organized by a company called Fork and Walk, who do food tours, obviously with a bit of history in. And this was just amazing. The guide, whose name does escape me, I'm very sorry, but he's American Vietnamese, obviously living here now, and but he speaks fluent Vietnamese, and most of the people that are inside the Dong Xuan Center. But yeah, this is like an under-visited place, and I think quite a difficult place to visit. In that, when you go in there, how much Vietnamese do you speak? You are a little bit lost, right? It really does feel like, and I have been to Vietnam, so I can say it is a bit like going in there. And so, if you ever get the chance to,
how is it called again?
Dong Xuan, so DONG, and then next word XUAN.
Okay, all right.
And then Vietnamese is a tonal language, so it has all these different accents on that. Like Johnny White Boy can't do, even if I tried, unfortunately. Where else? Okay, third place. do you know TV-Asahi-Kirschblütenallee?
No.
This is a good one if you happen to be in like springtime, April, May time. So the whole western edge of Berlin was the Berlin Wall, right? It's all this death strip, all built by East Germany guard towers, whatever. And Japanese company was like, do you know what that one stretch of the wall needs? Yeah, exactly.
Beer company.
Yeah. Do you know what this stretch of the wall needs? It's like it needs cherry trees. So there's this whole big stretch of cherry trees down there, and it's really pretty. And I posted a video about it last spring, and I got a really nice comment on it from an American woman who was stationed here during the Cold War. She worked up on the spy station Teufelsberg, and she was like, yeah, like this is what we wanted, right? We wanted this wall to go, and we wanted people to just like sit and chill and enjoy themselves. And so, you know, what's more fun than sitting under some pink trees and having a glass of wine with your pals, you know? Like it's a lot better than a death strip.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't know, but I'm guessing. Yeah. I think those are 3 good spots. How are my tour guide credentials, you know? So trying to pull the rug from under me.
All right. Tell me a little bit about the podcast that you're going to do. What's the name and what kind of stories they can expect there?
The podcast is called History Flakes because I wanted to use a cereal box as the artwork, but then I wasn't good enough at Photoshop to do that. It's called History Flakes, the Berlin History Podcast.
And we will put the links there in the description.
There's links, there's a podcast link, and there's a website link, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be the website link. If someone wants to have any of the tours that you offer, they can see the full offer on your website.
Yep.
And also they can follow you on Instagram and TikTok.
And Twitter.
It was very nice having you here in the podcast. We learn a lot. I hope the people who's listening there also learn a little bit more about history and what is going on.
Thank you.
Or what's going on in Berlin. What was going on in Berlin.
Yeah, what has happened. From my side, you guys are really nice. This is fun.
Yeah.
I hope it's not the last time. And I know you got lots of people you want to interview, but this was really fun. So
it's not going to be the last time. We can have a round 2 next time.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions that
you didn't get to ask because Johnny talks too much.
No, because everything was super interesting. And actually,
So, thank you. You're very, very kind.
Thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thank you very much.